This is where the home of Johnny and June Cash stood for more than 3 decades before it burned in 2007.
They say Barry Gibb. Yes, that Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees bought Johnny Cash's house and burned it to the ground with all of Johnny and June Carter's belongings still inside. For years, the story has haunted fan forums and YouTube comments, whispered like gospel among strangers. A house of history, a blaze of destruction, and a pop icon to blame. It sounds like betrayal. It sounds like a curse. It sounds like the kind of story too strange not to be true. But the truth is stranger still. You're watching RetroWaves, where we strip back the myths, untangle the rumors, and walk you through the stories the tabloids could never get right. Hit subscribe, because today we're stepping into the ashes of a legend's home and the mystery of why so many believe Barry Gibb is the man who lit the match. The Hendersonville house wasn't just a structure. It was a landmark of music and love, built in 1968 and tucked along the curves of Old Hickory Lake in Tennessee. From the outside, it was stately, 14,000 square feet of stone and wood, towering windows that poured sunlight into wide living rooms. From the inside, it was something else. It was laughter, slammed doors, reconciliations, late-night songwriting sessions, and prayers whispered into the silence. Johnny Cash called it home for 35 years. It was where he tried to outrun his addictions, and where June Carter steadied him when he stumbled. It was where their children grew up, where family dinners turned into impromptu jam sessions, and where friends dropped by unannounced because they knew they'd be welcomed. The house wasn't just walls, it was the Cashes themselves, and its guest list reads like a history of 20th century music. Bob Dylan walked those halls during his Nashville years, swapping verses with Johnny like old companions. Chris Christopherson turned up with a tape of Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down, too nervous to knock, so he mowed Johnny's lawn until he noticed him. Roy Orbison, Waylon Jennings, Carl Perkins. The house was alive with voices that shaped American sound. Even the silence had a hum, like music was embedded in the walls. So when Johnny and June both passed away in 2003, June in May, Johnny only 4 months later, the house suddenly shifted. It was no longer just their home, it was a shrine. Fans would drive out of their way just to stop at the gates. For them, this wasn't a building. It was the last physical piece of the Cash Carter story still standing. And then in 2006, the house changed hands. And the buyer wasn't who anyone expected. Barry Gibb wasn't the obvious successor. To the public, he was the shimmering falsetto of disco, the last surviving brother of the Bee Gees, a man tied forever to the sound of dance floors and mirror balls. But music is rarely that simple. Barry's heroes weren't confined to one genre. He loved storytellers, men who wore their scars in their voices, and Johnny Cash was one of them. Barry admired Johnny not just as a performer, but as a survivor. He saw him as a man who carried his sins and still sang about grace. When the house came on the market, Barry didn't see just real estate. He saw history. He saw a chance to honor one of his musical inspirations. He and his wife Linda imagined restoring the home to its former beauty and using it as a creative retreat, a place where songs could still be born, long after Johnny and June were gone. To Barry, buying the house was an act of respect, but to many fans, it looked like trespassing. There's a detail the rumor always skips. By 2006, the Cash family had already removed Johnny and June's belongings. In the painful months after their passing, their children and estate carefully preserved everything that mattered: clothes, instruments, furniture, letters, keepsakes. Some were stored, some prepared for museums, some kept in the family. The house Barry bought was not a time capsule. It was a shell, grand, yes, but hollow. Its treasures had already been saved. Still, to the outside world, the house felt full. Fans believed the spirit of Johnny and June lived in those rooms. And when Barry's name appeared on the deed, suspicion grew. What was a Bee Gee doing with country's most sacred home? Barry pressed on anyway. He hired contractors. Renovation began. Anyone who has tried to restore an old home knows it's slow, messy work. Sawdust in the air, the sharp smell of chemicals and wood sealants, protective coats applied to beams and walls. Barry planned to keep the home's soul intact. He dreamed of writing there, of letting the lake breeze push through the windows as melodies formed in notebooks. It was a deeply personal dream, a private tribute to a man he had admired for decades. But that dream would end, not with music, but with smoke. It began like any other workday. contractors inside the house, applying wood preservatives to protect the structure. The air was thick with fumes, harmless most days, but combustible in the wrong moment. Then something went wrong. A spark, a flash, a breath of fire where none belonged. The blaze spread instantly. Old wood, dry and waiting, chemicals in the air feeding the flames. Neighbors spotted the smoke first, curling black against the spring sky. They ran outside, staring as the home of Johnny and June, the landmark they had driven by countless times, turned into a furnace. Fire trucks roared up, sirens slicing through the lakefront calm. Helicopters hovered overhead. News anchors went live as the roof caved in, the stone walls cracking under the heat. People gathered at the gates, some in tears, some in disbelief, as the sanctuary of the man in black was devoured before their eyes. Within hours, there was nothing left but ash and rubble. The fire made headlines, but it was the rumors that lit up even faster. How could a house that sacred vanish in a single afternoon? How could something so important slip away so suddenly? Fans filled in the blanks. Some said Barry had been careless, leaving workers unsupervised. Others suggested he had done it on purpose, that he didn't really care for the house and wanted to be rid of it. And then came the darkest rumor of all, that Johnny and June's belongings were still inside, lost forever. Clothes, instruments, letters, all turned to ash because of Barry. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. It sounded true. It sounded poetic, in a brutal kind of way. And soon the story stuck. Barry Gibb burned Johnny Cash's house to the ground. Barry wasn't in Tennessee when the fire happened. He was far away when the phone call came. The house was gone. His plans, his dream of honoring Johnny, gone with it. For Barry, it was devastation. He later admitted he never went back to the site. The loss was too painful. But while Barry mourned privately, the public spun a new story. The facts were quiet, the rumor was loud, and the loud story always wins. Barry Gibb had become the villain in someone else's tragedy. By sunrise, Old Hickory Lake was wrapped in a haze that didn't belong. The water rippled quietly, but the shore told another story, piles of blackened rubble where the Cash home had stood proud the day before. Neighbors trickled to the gates, some carrying flowers, others just holding coffee cups with trembling hands. Many couldn't look directly at the ruins. One woman whispered to a TV reporter, "I feel like we lost Johnny and June all over again." Helicopters circled overhead, their blades cutting through the air like knives. News anchors spoke in somber tones. Johnny Cash's legendary Hendersonville home reduced to ashes yesterday afternoon. The property was owned by Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees. The emphasis was always on the same point. Barry Gibb owned the house. Barry Gibb's name was stitched to every headline, every news chyron, every shocked whisper at the gates. The investigation unfolded methodically. Fire marshals picked through the wreckage, tracing charred beams like detectives reading a crime scene. The truth, though, was plain. Flammable wood preservatives had ignited during renovations. It was an accident. Science could explain it down to the spark. But the truth didn't travel. What traveled instead were whispers, theories, and accusations. Because chemicals ignited wasn't the kind of story fans could cling to, but Barry Gibb burned Johnny Cash's house. That one stuck. It started with confusion, then escalated into storytelling. Barry Gibb must have been careless. He hired the wrong people. The Cash family warned him not to touch the house, but he ignored them. The man in black's ghost refused to let a Bee live there. Johnny and June's belongings were still inside. It's all gone. Each rumor had no evidence, but grief doesn't care about evidence, it cares about meaning, and these rumors gave people meaning. The most chilling rumors were the ghost stories. Some fans swore Johnny Cash himself had started the fire from beyond the grave, that his spirit refused to allow anyone else in his home. On forums, fans described dark figures in the windows of news footage. One claimed, "I saw Johnny in the flames, strumming his guitar as the roof collapsed." Another insisted June's laughter could be heard faintly in the background of a TV clip. Of course, none of it was true. But to grieving fans, it felt real. It felt poetic. Other stories reached further back into the land itself. Locals whispered about drownings on Old Hickory Lake, about strange accidents that plagued its shoreline, about how the Cash house was cursed ground from the beginning. Some said June Carter's presence had held the darkness at bay. But once she passed, and Johnny followed, the land reclaimed what was its own. The fire, they said, wasn't an accident, it was destiny. Tabloids poured gasoline on the fire with stories of family anger. They printed anonymous quotes suggesting Johnny's children resented Barry Gibb, that they hadn't wanted the house sold at all, that they saw Barry's purchase as a betrayal, as if disco had invaded the temple of country. The truth? The Cash family knew Barry's intentions were respectful. They never blamed him, but tabloids didn't care. A headline about a grieving family lashing out sold papers, and so the rumor grew legs. Then came the ugliest rumor of all. On certain forums, fans claimed Barry had taken out a massive insurance policy and burned the house for profit. It was absurd. Investigators found nothing to support it, but scandal has a way of feeling truer than science. In this version of the story, Barry wasn't just careless, he was greedy. The BG who set fire to Johnny Cash's life just to line his pockets. It was pure fiction. But once a story like that spreads, it never fully dies. Why did people believe it so easily? Because Barry didn't belong. He wasn't a country icon. He wasn't Southern. He wasn't family. To many fans, he was an outsider in every sense. British, disco, falsetto, sequins. When tragedy struck, he was the convenient villain, the other who could be blamed. Barry didn't fight back. He didn't sue. He didn't demand corrections. He stayed silent. But silence didn't mean guilt. It meant grief. Barry had already endured loss beyond measure. His brother Andy had died young, at 30. Maurice had died suddenly in 2003, the same year Johnny and June passed. Robin would be gone just a few years later. The fire was another loss in a lifetime of losses. He had dreamed of writing in that house, breathing its history, keeping Johnny's spirit alive. Instead, he was branded the man who destroyed it. "I never went back," Barry later said. "I couldn't. It was too painful." Imagine that, wanting to honor your hero and ending up accused of betraying him. The truth was too ordinary. Chemicals, renovation, accident. But the myth that had poetry, it made sense of grief. It gave fans a story with a villain and a curse and a tragic ending worthy of a legend, and so the myth outlived the truth. The cruelest rumor was the idea that Johnny and June's belongings had burned. Fans pictured Johnny's guitars shattering in the heat, June's dresses catching fire, love letters curling into smoke, but it wasn't true. Their children had removed everything years earlier. After Johnny's death in 2003, the family carefully preserved the relics. Some went to museums, some stayed with family, some were stored safely. The house was empty of treasures when Barry bought it. The fire burned the structure, but the heart of Johnny and June, their belongings, their legacy, remained safe. This wasn't the first time myth eclipsed fact. Fans still say Elvis faked his death, that Jim Morrison lives in Paris, that Paul McCartney died in the 60s and was replaced, that Kurt Cobain didn't pull the trigger. Why do these stories survive? Because they're bigger than reality. And Barry Gibb burned Johnny Cash's house was bigger than the dull truth of chemicals and chance. It was irresistible. Barry's dream was simple, to sit in that house, guitar in hand, and feel the spirit of Johnny Cash in the walls. The fire stole that dream, and Barry never replaced it. He never bought another retreat. He never tried again. The Hendersonville fire closed that chapter forever. Despite the ashes, Johnny and June's legacy endured. Their belongings were safe, their music eternal, their love story untouchable. Today, Johnny's guitars can be seen in museums. June's letters are archived. Their voices rise from recordings, untouched by fire.
I'll never let it break 'cause I love you.
The house was gone, but the essence survived. Fans deserve to know this, because honoring legends means telling their stories as they were, not as rumor makes them. Johnny and June don't need to be remembered as ghosts consumed by flames. Barry doesn't deserve to be remembered as a villain. The truth honors them all. So let's strip it bare. Barry Gibb did not burn Johnny Cash's house down. The fire was accidental. The investigation proved it. Johnny and June's belongings were already preserved. What burned was wood. What survived was love. The Hendersonville house is gone, but Johnny Cash's voice still rumbles like thunder. June's laughter still sparkles. Their story still inspires. And Barry Gibb, unfairly blamed, still carries the scar of that day. In the end, the fire consumed a building, but it could never touch the music, the memories, or the love. And maybe that's the truth worth remembering, that even when flames erase the walls, they cannot erase the legacy. If you believe legends deserve truth, not rumor, Subscribe to RetroWaves, because behind every myth is a real story worth telling. Share this video with someone who still believes Barry Gibb burned Johnny Cash's life to the ground. Remind them, the only thing that deserves to burn is the rumor.